have to do something about this valve right now. People are freezing.
I understand that, but I cannot override a frozen safety mechanism. It's too dangerous.
You know, there's an old saying in the Marines that says complacency kills. And I've spent the better part of 60 years living by those words, breathing them like oxygen. Because when you've seen what happens when the lights go out and the help doesn't come, you stop trusting luck and you start trusting logistics. My name is Jack Silas, retired Master Sergeant, and for most of my life, the only enemy I worried about was the one holding a rifle. But I learned the hard way that the most dangerous threat isn't always a soldier in a uniform. Sometimes it's a woman in a beige cardigan, holding a clipboard who thinks her definition of neighborhood aesthetics trumps your right to survive the winter. It started with a propane tank, a simple, buried steel drum meant to keep my pipes from bursting and my blood from freezing when the grid inevitably failed. But to the Homeowners Association of Pineview Ridge, and specifically to a woman named Brenda Vance, that tank was a declaration of war. She didn't just find me, she didn't just threaten me with lawyers. She trespassed on my land in the dead of night and took a pair of bolt cutters to my supply line. Right before the worst blizzard in state history barreled down the valley, she thought she was teaching me a lesson about compliance, about bowing down to the petty little kingdom she'd built out of bylaws and color swatches. But she forgot one crucial thing. She forgot to check who held the keys to the castle. See, I didn't get mad, I didn't scream at the board meetings, and I didn't file a counter-complaint that would just sit in a drawer somewhere gathering dust. Instead, I walked out to the edge of my property line where an old, rusted iron valve wheel stuck out of the frozen ground, a relic from before the subdivision was built. A valve that sat squarely on my deeded land with no easement recorded, and I turned it to the right. Click, grind, silence. And just like that, I turned off the gas to the entire neighborhood. I moved to Pineview Ridge 3 years ago, looking for the kind of quiet you can only find when you put a few miles of asphalt between you and the city. And on paper, the place looked perfect: big lots, mature pines, and a view of the mountains that could break your heart. I did my due diligence, or at least I thought I did. I read the deed, checked the zoning, and traced the utility lines on the county maps, because I'm the kind of guy who wants to know exactly what's under his boots. I saw that the neighborhood was fed by an aging natural gas spur that crossed the corner of my lot, before branching out to the other 50 homes, a vestige of the old farm infrastructure this place was built on. It seemed like a technicality at the time, a line on a blueprint, but I filed it away in the back of my mind because in my line of work, you never know what piece of intel is going to save your hide. My first winter there was brutal, power lines snapping like twigs under the weight of ice, leaving folks shivering in the dark for days. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to be a victim of infrastructure failure again. I hired a certified contractor, pulled every permit the county required, and installed a redundant heating system to 500-gallon propane tanks, buried deep in the side yard, invisible from the street, feeding a whole house generator and a radiant floor system. It wasn't cheap, and it wasn't for show. It was insurance, plain and simple, a guarantee that no matter how hard the wind blew, my home would be a fortress of warmth. For 2 years, nobody noticed, and the snow fell, and the power flickered, and my lights stayed on, and I thought I'd found my peace. Then came Brenda. She didn't get elected so much as she ascended, taking over the HOA presidency when the old guy, a decent fellow named Gary, had a stroke and moved to Arizona. Brenda was a piece of work, the kind of person who treated the neighborhood covenants like holy scripture and viewed herself as the high priestess. She patrolled the streets in her pristine white SUV, slowing down to stare at garbage cans left out an hour too long, or grass that was a quarter-inch above regulation. I stayed off her radar by keeping my head down and my yard spotless, but guys like me, we have an instinct for surveillance, and I could feel her eyes on my place long before she made her move. It happened on a Tuesday in November, a gray, biting day when I had the fuel truck come out to top off the tanks for the season. The driver was a pro, in and out in 20 minutes, but as he was reeling in the hose, I saw the white SUV idling at the stop sign, just watching. The email hit my inbox before the truck had even cleared the main gate. Notice of violation. Unauthorized industrial storage, no hello Jack, no neighborly concern. Just red text and a demand to cease and desist immediately. She claimed the tanks were a hazardous eyesore and a violation of community harmony, impeding the visual flow of the landscape. I replied instantly, attaching the county permits, the safety inspection certificates, and a photo showing that the tanks were buried and completely hidden behind a 6-foot privacy fence. I thought facts would matter. I thought logic would win. I was wrong. Brenda replied within the hour, stating that county permits do not supersede association standards and informing me that the board would be conducting an on-site inspection the following morning. They didn't ask. They told. When she showed up, she brought 2 other board members with her, a nervous guy named Mike and a woman named Cheryl who wouldn't make eye contact with me. They marched up my driveway like they were serving a warrant. I met them on the porch, coffee in hand, blocking the path to the side gate. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Can I help you?" Brenda adjusted her glasses, peering at me with that tight, condescending smile that sets your teeth on edge. "Mr. Silas, we need to inspect the installation to determine the remediation costs." "Remediation?" I asked. "There's nothing to remedy. It's legal, it's safe, and it's invisible. It's not approved," she snapped, the smile vanishing. "And under Section 14, Paragraph B, we have the right to inspect any exterior modification. That authority ends at my fence line," I said, stepping forward just an inch, enough to let them know I wasn't moving. "Unless you have a court order or a badge, you're trespassing. And I suggest you check the state laws on private utility easements before you take another step." Mike looked at Brenda, shuffling his feet. "Maybe we should check with legal first, Brenda. He has the permits." She spun on him, her voice dropping to a hiss. "We don't need permission to enforce our own rules, Mike. This is about precedent. If we let him keep this bunker, what's next? Solar panels on the front lawn? Chickens?" She turned back to me, eyes cold. "You have 7 days to remove them, Mr. Silas. After that, the fines begin. $100 a day, doubling weekly. Do not test us." She turned and marched off, her boots clicking sharply on the pavement. I watched them go, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that tells you the diplomacy phase is over and the attrition phase has begun. The next few weeks were a barrage of paper, certified letters, threatened liens, emails copying the entire neighborhood distribution list, painting me as a dangerous survivalist, hoarding explosive gas next to a playground. It was nonsense. Of course the tanks were safer than the old gas mains rotting under the street, but fear is a powerful tool, and she wielded it like a master. I documented everything, every letter, every threat, storing it all on hard drives, backing it up, preparing for the legal fight I knew was coming. But Brenda grew impatient. The forecast was turning nasty. Talk of a polar vortex dipping down from Canada, bringing temps of 20 below and wind chills that could freeze flesh in minutes. She knew winter was her enemy too, and she decided to strike before the snow flew. I woke up at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday to the sound of my furnace sputtering. It was a rhythmic coughing noise, the sound of a burner starving for fuel. I sat up, instantly awake, checking the thermostat monitor on my phone. The house temp was dropping. My primary gas line, the city feed, was working fine for the stove, but the propane backup, which I kept in a slow circulation mode to keep the lines warm, was dead pressure. I threw on my parka, grabbed a high-beam flashlight, and went out into the dark. The wind was already picking up, biting at my face. But what I smelled stopped me in my tracks, the rotten egg stench of mercaptan, propane. I ran to the side yard. The gate was unlatched. I shined the light on the regulator assembly, the complex brass fitting that managed the flow from the buried tanks. It wasn't a leak from wear and tear. The copper feed line had been crimped and then snapped, twisted back and forth until the metal fatigued and broke. It was a jagged, ugly tear, and the valve had been wrenched open to let the gas vent out into the night air. It was sabotage, pure and simple and dangerous as hell. If a spark had hit that plume, half the block would have gone up. I quickly shut the manual valves at the tank heads, stopping the leak, my hands shaking not from the cold, but from rage. This wasn't a fine. This wasn't a letter. This was an attack. I went straight to the security system. I'd installed high-definition night vision cameras under the eaves the week I moved in. Another habit I couldn't shake. I pulled up the footage from 2:15 a.m. It was ghostly green and gray, but clear enough. A figure in a heavy coat and a distinctively long, patterned scarf, the same scarf Brenda wore every single day, struggled with the gate, slipped inside, and spent for minutes at the regulator. I watched her stomp on the line, watched her use a pair of pliers to twist the fitting until it snapped. She didn't look around. She didn't hesitate. She looked like someone who believed she was doing God's work. I saved the clip. I backed it up. Then I called the police non-emergency line and filed a report for vandalism and trespassing. A deputy came out, took photos, looked at the footage, and nodded grimly. "We'll pay her a visit," he said. But without a clear shot of her face, it's hard to make a criminal charge stick immediately. It's circumstantial. We need more. I sent the footage to the HOA board anyway, copying the management company. "This is what your president is doing," I wrote. "She destroyed a safety system days before a blizzard. I expect immediate resignation and restitution." The response didn't come from the board. It came from Brenda, via the HOA attorney. "Mr. Silas is attempting to deflect from his own violations by making defamatory accusations against board leadership. The footage is grainy and inconclusive. The fines stand. Remove the debris immediately." She called my heating system debris. She destroyed it, drained hundreds of dollars of fuel, risked an explosion, and then laughed in my face. That was the moment. That was the tipping point. I stood on my porch, looking at the gray wall of clouds moving in over the mountains, feeling the temperature plummet. The news was screaming about the storm of the century. They were calling it the Gray Wolf, and my neighbors, the ones who had watched Brenda harass me and said nothing, the ones who let her run this place like a prison camp, were about to find out just how fragile their comfort really was. I remembered the map, the old blueprint I'd studied 3 years ago. The main gas feed for Pineview Ridge came off the county trunk line, ran under the creek, and surfaced at a regulator station on the corner of my lot, my deeded land. When the developer built the place in the 80s, they got lazy. They never recorded a utility easement for that specific 10-foot square of land. They just assumed no one would ever notice or care. It was a legal gray area the size of a tractor trailer. But physically, there was a heavy iron wheel valve protected by a chain link cage that sat right next to my hydrangeas. It controlled the flow, all of it. I walked out there. The wind was howling now, snow starting to spit sideways. I had bolt cutters in my shed. The irony wasn't lost on me. I cut the padlock the HOA had put on the cage years ago. I stepped inside. The valve was cold, rusted, ancient. I put my gloved hands on the wheel. It resisted. It fought me. I gritted my teeth, planting my boots in the freezing mud, and shoved. With a screech of tortured metal, it gave. I turned it. 1 rotation, 2, 3. I felt the vibration in the pipe die away. The hiss of gas stopped. I locked the cage with my own hardened steel padlock. I put up a sign that said private property, nitrogen monoxide trespassing under legal review. And then I went inside, fired up my wood stove, my tertiary backup, and waited for the lights to go out. It took about 4 hours for the pressure to bleed out of the neighborhood lines. It started with the pilot lights, then the furnaces, then the water heaters. By 8 p.m., the text started flying in the neighborhood group chat, which I monitored but never posted in. "Anyone else lose heat? My furnace is blowing cold air. Called the gas company. They said there's a blockage. It's 10 degrees out. What is happening?" Brenda was on there instantly, telling everyone to remain calm, that she was coordinating with providers. She had no idea. She thought it was a utility failure. She thought she could yell at a manager somewhere and fix it. By midnight, the temperature outside was -5. Inside the poorly insulated McMansions of Pineview Ridge, it was dropping into the 40s. My house was a toasty 70 degrees, the wood stove crackling cheerfully, my generator humming in the back to keep the fans moving. I sat in my armchair, watching the streetlights haloed in swirling snow, sipping bourbon. The pounding on my door started at 4 a.m. It sounded like someone was trying to break it down. I checked the camera. It was Brenda. She looked manic. Her expensive coat was wrapped tight, but she was shivering violently, her face pale and pinched. I took my time walking to the door. I opened it, leaving the storm screen locked. "Jack," she screamed over the wind. "Jack, open this door." "It's for AM, Brenda," I said calmly. "You're trespassing. The gas." She shrieked. "The gas company guy is here. He says the shut-off is on your lot. He says he can't touch it because it's behind your lock. Did you do this? Did you kill the heat?" "I secured my property," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. "After my own heating system was vandalized by an intruder, I conducted a security audit of my land. I found an unauthorized, uneasemented utility hazard. I shut it down pending a safety review. Can't be too careful, right? Safety first." Her jaw dropped. She stared at me with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. You can't. People are freezing. My house is. I can see my breath in my kitchen. You have to turn it back on." "I don't have to do anything," I said, leaning closer to the glass. "You destroyed my backup. You cut my line. You told me my safety didn't matter. Well, now we're in the same boat, Brenda. Except I built a life raft, and you poked holes in yours. I'll call the police." She wailed. "I'll have you arrested." "Call them," I said. "Show them the deed. Show them the easement you don't have. And while you're at it, explain to them why you were in my yard with bolt cutters 2 nights ago. Get off my porch." I slammed the door and locked it. I went back to the window. She stood there for a minute, screaming into the wind, a tiny, powerless figure against the storm she had summoned. Then she turned and ran back to her freezing SUV. The siege had begun. The next 48 hours were what I imagine the end of the world looks like in suburbia: slow, quiet, and absolutely freezing. The blizzard, the gray wolf, parked itself over the valley and refused to move, dumping to feet of snow and driving the wind chill down to 30 below zero. The entire neighborhood of Pinneview Ridge turned into a glacier. You could hear the houses contracting in the cold, the wood groaning and popping like gunshots in the night. From my living room window, sipping hot coffee, I watched the transformation. It wasn't just the physical cold. It was the psychological freeze. The arrogance that usually permeated this place, the obsession with lawn stripes and paint colors evaporated instantly, replaced by a desperate, animal need for warmth that the power grid held for the first day. So people ran electric space heaters, overloading the circuits and tripping breakers. But electric heat is useless against that kind of pervasive cold when your walls are cooling down to match the outside air. Then, on day 2, a transformer down the road blew with a flash of blue light, and the electricity died. That's when the panic set in. I saw families piling into cars, engines idling in driveways just to run the heaters. But the snow was so deep the plows hadn't reached us yet. They were trapped in their perfect, expensive, freezing boxes. My phone blew up. Not just the group chat now, but direct calls. Neighbors I'd never spoken to, people who had looked through me for 3 years, were suddenly begging. "Mr. Silas, please. Jack, we have a baby. Jack." My pipes burst. I didn't answer the phone. I wasn't doing this to be cruel to them. I was holding the line. I knew that if I caved now, if I turned that valve before the ink was dry on the surrender, Brenda would spin it. She'd say I was crazy, that I held them hostage for no reason, and she'd be back on my property with a fine the next week. I needed total, unconditional capitulation, but I wasn't a monster. I put on my snow gear, heavy parka, thermal boots, goggles, and loaded a sled with supplies. I walked down the street to the house of Old Man Miller, a Vietnam vet who lived 3 doors down. He never bothered anyone. I knocked, and when his shivering daughter opened the door, I handed over a spare propane heater I had in the garage and 3 canisters of fuel. "Keep the windows cracked for ventilation," I told her. "This will keep one room warm. Stay in there." I did the same for the young couple with the newborn on the corner. I gave them my backup battery bank and an electric blanket. "Why are you doing this?" the young father asked, teeth chattering, looking at me like I was an alien. "Brenda said you're a domestic terrorist." "Brenda lies," I said. "Stay warm." By the morning of the 3rd day, the city finally forced its way in. A heavy-duty snowcat from the sheriff's department smashed a path through the drifts, followed by a black SUV marked Department of Public Utilities and a police cruiser. They pulled up to my house. I was waiting on the porch, armed with a thermos of coffee and a thick manila envelope containing my deed, the survey maps, and the video of Brenda's vandalism. Two deputies and a suit from the city got out. Brenda was with them, huddled in the back of the cruiser, wrapped in a blanket, looking small and defeated. "Mr. Silas?" the suit asked. "I'm Inspector Davis. We have a crisis here. We need access to the gas main." "I understand the crisis," I said, handing him the envelope. "But before you cut that lock, you need to look at this. That valve is on private property. There is no recorded easement. The HOA has no right to it. And the reason it's closed is because that woman," I pointed at the cruiser, "sabotaged my personal heating system in an act of criminal trespass. I secured the hazardous utility on my land to prevent further tampering." Inspector Davis was a bureaucrat, but he was a smart one. He opened the envelope. He looked at the deed. He looked at the survey. He looked at the stills from the video of Brenda destroying my regulator. His eyebrows shot up. He walked over to the cruiser and tapped on the window. Brenda rolled it down an inch. "Mrs. Vance," Davis said, his voice carrying in the cold air, "did you instruct the HOA to perform maintenance on Mr. Silas's property?" I was enforcing the rules," she stammered, her voice hoarse. "Did you cut his gas line?" She didn't answer. She just started to cry. Davis walked back to me. "Okay, Mr. Silas, legally, you've got us over a barrel. It's your land. The utility company screwed up 40 years ago. But morally, people are suffering. We can drag this through court for months while these houses rot, or we can make a deal right now." "I don't want money," I said. "I want the HOA dissolved. I want a signed confession from Brenda regarding the vandalism, and I want the city to acknowledge, in writing, that my propane tanks are compliant and protected." Davis looked at the shivering deputies, then at the frozen neighborhood. "Done. I can't dissolve the HOA instantly, but I can issue an emergency order suspending their authority, pending a criminal investigation into the vandalism. That effectively kills them. I'll witness the agreement." We were drafting the paper on the hood of the cruiser when we heard the sound. It was a loud, sharp crack, like a rifle shot, coming from Brenda's house across the street. Then another. Then the sound of rushing water. "Oh no," Brenda whispered from the car. We all looked. Water was pouring out of her second-story window, freezing into icicles as it hit the siding. A main pipe in her attic had burst. The weight of the water was already bringing down the ceiling in her living room. You could hear the crash of wet drywall hitting her expensive hardwood floors. Her castle was collapsing from the inside out. Brenda scrambled out of the car, screaming, trying to run toward the house, slipping in the snow. My mother's china. The photos. She fell face first into a drift. The deputies moved to help her, but I was closer. I walked over and offered her a hand. She looked up at me, her face a mask of ruin. The arrogance was gone. The pettiness was gone. There was just a woman watching her life wash away. "It's gone," she sobbed. "It's all ruined. It's just stuff, Brenda," I said, hauling her up. "It's just wood and drywall. You're alive." I looked at Davis. "Give me the bolt cutters." I walked over to the cage. I cut my own lock. I turned the wheel. It groaned, protested, and then opened. I heard the hiss of gas rushing back into the pipes, the sound of life returning to the veins of the neighborhood. "Get the crews in," I told Davis. "Relight the pilots. Get them warm." The aftermath was a different kind of storm. The thaw revealed the damaged tens of thousands of dollars in ruined plumbing, warped floors, and destroyed furniture across the neighborhood. But Brenda got the worst of it. Her house was a total loss, gutted by water damage and mold before it could dry out. She didn't have the fight left in her to argue. She signed the confession. She resigned from the board. She moved out 3 weeks later, quietly, in a rental van, without making eye contact with anyone. It came out later, through the neighborhood grapevine, that her mother had died in a house fire caused by a faulty heater when Brenda was a kid. That was why she was so obsessed with control, why she hated my dangerous tanks. It didn't excuse what she did. Trauma isn't a license to be a tyrant, but it made her human. I almost felt sorry for her, almost with Brenda gone and the city's emergency order in place. The HOA crumbled. Nobody wanted to step up and run it. They were too busy fixing their houses and, frankly, they were too ashamed. The neighborhood held a meeting a month later in my driveway, the only place big enough that was fully cleared of snow. There were no clipboards, no gavels, just neighbors standing around drinking coffee I'd brewed. "So," Old Man Miller said, leaning on his cane, "what do we do now? Who's in charge?" I looked around at them. They looked tired, but they also looked awake for the first time in years. "Nobody's in charge," I said. "We look out for each other. If you see a problem, you talk to your neighbor. If it snows, we plow. If the power goes out, we share generators. We don't need a board to tell us how to be human beings." A young woman raised her hand. "But what about the entrance? The landscaping?" "I'll mow the strip on the left," Miller said. "I'll take the right," the young father volunteered. And that was it. The Pineview Ridge Community Collective was born. Voluntary, no fines, no power trips. Spring came early that year. The snow melted, revealing the scars on the houses, but also the green grass underneath. I was out in the yard, painting the fence, the same fence Brenda hated when the teenage girl I'd given the heater to walked by. She stopped. "Mr. Silas?" "Just Jack, kid. My dad says you saved us. He says you're the only reason we didn't freeze." "I just turned a valve," I said. "The rest was up to you guys." She smiled. "Well, thanks anyway." "Oh, and nice fence." I watched her walk away, and I felt something settle in my chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with propane. I had come here for solitude, to get away from people, but in the end, I had to break the neighborhood to save it. I looked at the patch of ground where the valve sat. The city had come out and officially recorded the easement, putting a new, modern lock on it. But they gave me a key, just in case. Inspector Davis had said with a wink, "You see, freedom isn't free, and neither is warmth. You have to be willing to fight for it, to plan for it, and sometimes you have to be the one guy willing to be the villain so everyone else can wake up." The HOA is dead. Long live the neighborhood. So, here's the question I leave you with. When the storm comes and at Alwa,